I totally disagree with Kimberly. I'm not trying to let the Cowboys off the hook. We ain't having that. $60 million quarterback, C.D. Lamb, and $136 million. A.J. Brown is out injured. Devontae Smith was out injured. Lane Johnson was out injured. You okay? There's a lot of stuff to prove. And then you got Sirianni. He's on a hot seat in some people's eyes, and their defense is trash half the time. Oh, there's a lot of problems in Philadelphia. So the word disappointment might come to some people's mind, but in the end, the combination of injuries, new coordinators, a coach being on a hot seat, defense being questionable, those weren't the things we were saying about the Dallas Cowboys coming into this season. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sergeant Friday, a.k.a. Jeff Saturday. I thought Micah Parsons was going to be one of the highest paid defensive players. That's what I thought. DeMarcus Lawrence, I know him and Micah Parsons was out last games, but before then, they was getting ran roughshod over. Everybody could run on them until they ran into the New York Giants, who don't have much of a running game. Their defense was absolutely porous. Offensively, where's your running game? Non-existent. Your passing game, it's CeeDee Lamb and nobody else. What's up with that? It's America's team. We were wondering whether or not the Dallas Cowboys season was going to be over had they not rolled into Pittsburgh last Sunday night and handled their business because Steelers offense forgot to show up. We got to remember that too. So when I'm looking at a disappointment or a bigger letdown this season, I expected some trouble from the Philadelphia Eagles the minute you lose A.J. Brown, a Devontae Smith, a Lane Johnson. I didn't expect this much trouble from the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah. The Dallas Cowboys looked highly suspect. Hell yeah, they're the bigger letdown this season.
Okay, so let's talk about this. It's so interesting what you mean by let down in terms of who did you have higher expectations for. The Cowboys or the Eagles. Now, if you want to explain, because the way how I went into it this season was saying that the Cowboys are really not that good of a team. And, from my viewpoint, that's still largely accurate, quite frankly, despite Cowboys fans wanting to accept that reality. And again, right, Dak Prescott is supposed to be a top quarterback in the NFL. He still has C.D. Lamb, Mike McCarthy, Super Bowl winning head coach. Everyone was saying that again. You have to pick it. You have to pick what you think is the reality. Do you think Mike McCarthy is a good coach or not? Do you think Dak Prescott is the great quarterback or not? Right? And everyone was saying, especially if you're the Cowboys fan, saying, "Look what they've done for the last 3 years. They keep winning 12 plus games a season. And the reverse the Packers, that was just a fluke. And they actually have a better defensive coordinator than Dan Quinn." And then they go into this season, and right now they have a couple injuries, but prior to that, they did not look good. That just can't be argued against. And to argue against it, from my viewpoint, is just, quite frankly, absolutely absurd. Because they were healthy. You do have Dak. You have Mike McCarthy and C.D. Lamb and an offensive line. That alone is enough for you to be able to put up points and win some games. And they were not. And they still had Micah and Lawrence, and all the defense was healthy, and yet they were getting rolled by like the Saints, by the Ravens, right? Like, again, you beat an awful Cleveland Browns team and an average New York Giants team and an average Pittsburgh Steelers team. And again, so that is where that disappointment, if you think that they are just as good as they were in years past or better, then yeah, that is going to be a disappointment. Now, of course, with some of the injuries on defense, that starts to kind of make that a little bit muddier. But again, as Stephen A. actually pointed out, like that wasn't the problem until last game, quite frankly. That wasn't the story throughout the season. On the other hand, you have the Eagles now, who I had higher expectations for, but then they now run into injury issues, right? They're missing A.J. Brown, their number one wide receiver. They are missing Devontae, the number 2 wide receiver. They are missing multiple linemen, their center goes down. Lane Johnson goes down, who's, one of the greatest to ever do it, if not the greatest to ever do it. That is a problem. And if you could say defense is bad, I was expecting, and still am, quite frankly, the defense to be better this season than last year. So, because Stephen A. is saying that he expected, I guess, these problems going into the season. And so that's why they weren't a letdown, having a new coordinator and new coordinators for that matter. But I guess that's where I kind of see it the opposite, because I was seeing that those coordinators were going to make everything better. My biggest concern was Nick Sirianni going into this season, and I was thinking that everything else would get better. And I don't think that that's hasn't not been the case. Like, it's kind of interesting. If you go back here, you can still see that the Eagles have a higher percent chance to make the playoffs than the Cowboys, which I think is pretty funny and pretty interesting. So this season, again, because of the bye, because of the injuries to AJ, Devontae, etc., that's where things have kind of also got muddled, right? Both the Cowboys and the Eagles season has kind of got muddled in that regard. So for me moving forward, for me to try to figure out who the Philadelphia Eagles are, because I'm confident who the Cowboys are, right? The Cowboys are always who I think they are, with Dak Prescott and Mike McCarthy right now. Is they can consistently beat the average and bad teams, and they consistently do not against the great teams, right? Like, that's just been their story for years now, and there's just no reason to believe that that's suddenly going to change. But with the Philadelphia Eagles, this is where it's going to be interesting, because they now play the Cleveland Browns, and I really hope they don't switch out Jameis Winston and Jameis Winston for Deshaun Watson, because we've had a lot of other teams now play the Browns, especially two other NFC East teams, the Commanders and the Cowboys, of course. And so that would be interesting to see what the Cowboys do. It totally changes everything if Jameis Winston plays, because now it'll be a different team with a different quarterback. We've seen just how different the Panthers look, right, with Andy Dalton versus Bryce Young. So I would love to see what the Eagles do against the Browns. And it's like, if they lose that team, or if it's a close game, the only way a close game from my viewpoint would be acceptable is if Watson or Winston, for that matter, just they're able to like rewind the clock and absolutely ball out, right? Like, they're just making all these crazy throws and it's just like, wow, this is insane. But outside of a game like that, it would be just, it would be right. It would be then who's the bigger disappointment. It would be at that point the Eagles. So a lot from my viewpoint is riding on this Cleveland Browns game. I want to see if the Eagles can beat them pretty good, like the Cowboys and the Commanders have done. As long as the Eagles are fully healthy. I don't know what the story is. As long as they actually have their weapons, as long as they have AJ Brown and Devontae. I feel like at the very least that's having at least AJ Brown would be important. To my knowledge, they both should be playing, but again, I really don't know. I don't really check the injury updates regularly. I just kind of wait until the moment. But yeah, no, I think if the Eagles can stay healthy. So again, this is where the disappointment comes in. If the Eagles are fully healthy and they don't make the playoffs, then that would, from my viewpoint, would be a massive disappointment for the Philadelphia Eagles. If they get injured, right, if AJ Brown just can't stay in the lineup, and Devontae had a concussion, so he should be fine. But if they don't really sustain any two like big prominent injuries like Saquon, AJ, whoever, it would be a disappointment, but it wouldn't be a letdown, because it would be like, well, I understand that they got injured, right? Like, just like if I had high hopes for the Cowboys and now CD, Micah go down, I'm like, okay, well, what do you want the Cowboys to do, right? You're missing your key point on defense and your main weapon, on offense. Like, what are you going to expect? Same thing with the Rams, how Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp went down. It's like, well, I'm not expecting the Rams and Sean McVay to be able to just overcome that. It just becomes too much. I think you can overcome some injuries for a short period of time, but not consistently. Like I keep saying, a great coach and a great quarterback will be able to overcome a certain degree of injuries, but sometimes it's just too much, or they can overcome some injuries for a short window of time, but they can't sustain it. But again, it all depends on where the injuries are, how many injuries they are. I mean, if you have no offensive line and no offensive weapons, it's like, well, you're not going to overcome no matter who you are. So yeah, the Eagles, I think it'll be interesting, especially now that the Jets fired Robert Saleh, because I could see if the Eagles lose and they go 2-3 versus the Browns, I could see Nick Sirianni getting fired. I could see that kind of domino copycat effect of firing Nick Sirianni, especially if the Jets end up winning. versus the Bills, and that like inspires them in some way. I could see that potentially having some sort of indirect influence. But if the Eagles beat the Browns, they beat the Browns big time, it'll be like, all right, we're rolling now, baby. Like, I feel like they would just get back behind Nick Sirianni, which I do think would be a mistake for the Philadelphia Eagles. But yeah, I think there's just so much riding on that Browns game, which is kind of comical to say that the Eagles' perception can be riding on the Cleveland Browns game. And it's also Jim Schwartz, who was also the old defensive coordinator for the Eagles. I feel like that the team has changed so much since Schwartz was there that I don't think that has any type of impact. Like Dan Quinn, the Washington Commanders facing the Cowboys, I think could have direct impact because he knows that team intimately. I don't think Jim Schwartz has that intimate knowledge at this point of what the Philadelphia Eagles do because it's just different. Although he's going to want to beat them, I'm sure he definitely has that incentive and wants to bring his A game, but I don't think he has any type of you know, deep depth of knowledge that could give him a leg up versus the Browns. So the Browns defense just dominates the Eagles offense. I wouldn't say that, well, they have Schwartz like that. Of course, he's, he can do that. But I would say that for the Commanders versus the Cowboys, quite frankly. I don't know if the Commanders have the personnel to be able to dominate the Cowboys in that way based off of how deeply Dan Quinn understands, honestly, both that defense and offense for the Cowboys. But that is another game that I'm really excited for, the Cowboys and Commanders game. I think that has potential to be really, really interesting, especially because for years the Cowboys absolutely have owned the Commanders, and now the Commanders actually have a quarterback and a coach and coordinators, and so that should be a really fun game. But yeah, no, Eagles coming off this bye should be more healthy. They know it's at stake. They all know that they're playing for their jobs here. But I think, that game will definitely be very telling and will be a great barometer to see where the Eagles stand in that regard. Because it'll be very telling, quite frankly. But those are just my thoughts. I'd absolutely love to hear yours. What do you guys all think about the Philadelphia Eagles or the Dallas Cowboys? Who do you think, which season has been a bigger disappointment, the Cowboys or the Eagles? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single comment, so whether you agree with me or disagree with me, either way, let's get in some discussions, let's get in some fights, but ultimately, let's just have some fun. And please do consider subscribing. We are building an amazing community here, and I'd absolutely love to see you part of it. I'm going to build something that we all genuinely feel connected to. Something that we're really excited to be part of. I think we're on our way to doing it. And please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really does help with the visibility and the algorithm. Thank you so much, and see you next time.